welcome back to episode 24 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Binns, and today I'm just so excited because last night we had the huge main event, Lerone Murphy versus Josh Emmett. We're going to talk about that. Torrez, Finney, Smith, a little bit of a controversial win that has to do with what we were talking about last week with grappling, holding against the fence. How should that be judged, and does MMA scoring and judging need fixing? And then we're going to look forward to UFC 314, obviously coming this Saturday night, or next Saturday night, I should say. Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett in the co-main event. I want to talk a little bit about the Michael Chandler cheating narrative, and also about Volk versus Lopes in the main event, of course. And then looking even further, we've got Sugar Sean versus Merab 2 for the bantamweight title, which is a little bit of a controversial matchup in itself. Sean O'Malley getting booked. But also I want to talk about some comments Javier Mendez said about Merab performance in his last defense against Umar Nurmagomedov. But let's get into last night straight away. Oh, before I do that, please subscribe. I always forget to say that. And I just really appreciate the support on the last content. We had thousands of views last week on the clips, which is, an all-time high for me. So I just want to say I really appreciate that and keep going, man. I'm trying to build this healthily, as I say. So let's just get into Lerone Murphy. Why are you staring at me? I have an audience today and I'm struggling. I've had to record 5 times. I've got about 10 people in the room, lots of producers and people like that, Anyway, yeah, so last night, Lerone Murphy versus Josh Emmett. I mean, I wasn't able to do a podcast in time before the fight, and I didn't want to, then make a whole Twitter spiel about who I think was going to win the fight, but it was a really close call, and I knew it was going to be extremely competitive. I was very surprised when I saw the odds that Josh Emmett was a plus 250 or plus 260 underdog. I think I even saw a plus 290 on some websites. That was crazy to me because I knew the prowess that Josh Emmett brings to the cage. We spoke about the power that he has. Obviously, that Bryce Mitchell knockout, I think, might be the hardest knockout I've ever seen. Somebody lifeless on the ground out. So I don't know if I'm allowed to say that anymore. But, I knew it was going to be a competitive fight. And Lerone Murphy, undefeated from England, very technical. I think at that point, 15-0-1. I think there was a 1-0 contest in there. So I knew it was going to be a battle of the footwork. It was going to be a battle of, who can dominate in terms of the distance control. And Lerone Murphy, if I'm being honest with you, just put on an absolute clinic of a show, able to keep that distance, able to keep that control, using the jab. I thought his body kicks were excellent. That left switch kick to the body that just kept Josh Emmett staggered back. But, Josh Emmett didn't stop coming. And Josh Emmett, in my opinion, did win at least 2 rounds. I thought it was 2-2 going into the 5th. By which point I was watching on my ESPN app in a taxi. So don't take my analysis too strongly. But what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say I was just very surprised about the odds. And, I see a lot of people reacting to the fight today. I saw Lerone Murphy reacting to a lot of the criticism of his performance, saying it was boring, saying he was running away. I don't feel the same. I feel like Lerone Murphy was able to use the tools in his arsenal, able to use his kicks, able to circle off the cage, use the feints to kind of stagger Josh Emmett, not let him move forward, because Josh Emmett's probably, as I said, got the hardest punch in the game. And if you're Lerone Murphy, you're not going to sit there and trade with him with your back against the cage. Now, there was moments in the fight, especially in that 5th round, even in that 4th round, where I felt like Josh Emmett was kind of backing Lerone Murphy up, getting him up against the cage and able to unload. And, I'm not inside Lerone Murphy's camp or anything. I haven't spoken to Lerone. Take this with a grain of salt and maybe a boulder of salt, you know what I mean? He just didn't look as weight drained this time. And maybe that contributed to him being able to take those shots up against the cage better. He looked a lot more comfortable when he did get hit. Last time we saw him out against Dan Ige, he did get dropped. And I remember, I think that was very, very early on when I started this podcast and I spoke about Lerone Murphy, about how highly I rated him as a fighter. And I think people, because of the way he fights, because he's not necessarily putting people out cold, they're starting to be like, this criticism, he's not a finisher. Why didn't he go in there and just try and knock Josh Emmett out? Well, it's because if he gets into an exchange where he's just trying to swing full throttle against Josh Emmett, he might end up, waking up in an ambulance. You know what I mean? So full credit to both of those guys. I thought Josh Emmett, even at 40 years old, looked excellent. His pace may have been a little bit slower, but I don't know if that was as much age as it was Lerone Murphy being, such a genius with the footwork, circling in the right way, able to use those feints, as I said. And overall, I thought it was a great main event. And it's such a shame that it was in the Apex. I know people had the criticism. I know Lerone Murphy, for example, on Twitter was, talking about, real MMA fans will understand what of a performance I just put on. And, there was criticism with the performance, but it still deserves, in my opinion, a live crowd to be there. Because, an Apex, somebody like Lerone Murphy, who's now, I guess, Josh Emmett was number 8. So Lerone Murphy's a top 8 featherweight in the world, an undefeated prospect coming for a title in that division. For him to not be performing in front of a big crowd is kind of a tragedy. And I know it's financially more, fiscally responsible for the UFC to have these Apex events in Vegas. But as a UFC fan, even watching through the TV, you want to see big arenas. You want to see crazy reactions from the crowd. I'm trying to find the tweet that Lerone Murphy put out. If I can, let's see. Yes, he put it here. Clinic, real MMA fans will appreciate the technicality of that fight. That's fight IQ, punishing elbows and close body kicks, neat footwork, had him hurt a few times. Why would I stay in the pocket with a power puncher, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee? I mean, that's pretty much what I just said, but I totally back him on that. It's not like, as I went on an absolute emotional rampage last week about fighters returning to grappling up against the cage and holding their opponent up against the cage once they'd been separated by the ref. It wasn't like we saw in the Torrez Finney fight. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I wasn't able to watch much of the Torrez Finney fight, unfortunately, but I have seen reactions from it. And, that Torrez Finney fight, and I saw moments, obviously, I think he landed the least amount of significant strikes in a long time, I think, in that division. So it's definitely not a plus on his record, especially for someone who kind of had a controversial entrance into the UFC with Dana White not necessarily wanting him to be there. Least significant strikes in a decision win in middleweight history, which is kind of an achievement in itself. I mean, obviously he had dominant grappling, got the slam on Valentin, was able to keep him up against the fence, up against his will. But as we spoke about last week, there is a difference between offensive grappling, like we saw, for example, with Sean Brady against Leon Edwards in London, and, something like Torrez Finney-Smith versus Valentin, or Mario Bautista versus Jose Aldo. Something has to be changed in the unified rules of mixed martial arts, or, whoever controls the specific rules, whether it's the athletic commissions, whether the UFC can have some sort of influence. Something needs to change, because you can't reward fighters the entire time for holding up their opponent up against the cage, especially if the ref separates them. And we're not going to go into that discussion all over again, but I do want to know what you guys thought about the Torrez Finney-Smith versus Valentin fight, because it is going to be a big story coming out of this event. And I wasn't able to fully watch the fight, and I'd love to know what you guys are thinking. But yeah, back to that main event. So what's next for Lerone Murphy? I mean, I see that he called out, I think it was Brian Ortega, exactly. It was Brian Ortega. Lerone Murphy calls out Brian Ortega. I think he said he's going to put him to sleep, and I think, the certain type of fan will be on him now saying, you couldn't put Josh Emmett to sleep. You didn't put this and X, Y, and Z to sleep. How are you going to put Brian Ortega to sleep? But that's definitely a fight I would love to see. I mean, Brian Ortega's been a mainstay of the featherweight division for years. You can't remember the featherweight division without mentioning Brian Ortega. So then for Lerone Murphy to go up and fight him is a big name on his record, a big scalp, if he can take it. And I'd be, very, very excited for that fight. And also Lerone Murphy for a 5-round matchup. I'm sure he didn't take too much damage, obviously, in that Josh Emmett fight. I don't know how training camp was. I don't know what injuries he took into the octagon with him, but maybe he can get a quick turnaround. And the last time we saw Brian Ortega was quite a while ago. So, very, very exciting times. Obviously, Brian Ortega takes a lot more damage than a lot of fighters, so he might need a bit more of a time in between fights. But that'd be an exciting fight, man, especially for the featherweight division right now, which is on fire. Next week, UFC 314, obviously, the undisputed belt at featherweight is on the line between Volk and Diego Lopes, which is an incredible fight. And it's actually so crazy because, well, after Ilia beat Volk, I was in Mexico City when I was watching that. After Ilia beat Volk, and then obviously goes on to beat Max Holloway, you're starting to think to yourself, okay, who's he going to fight next? Is he going to get double champ status? Can he move up to lightweight? And then you end up finding out that he is moving up to lightweight. but he's not taking the featherweight belt with him. So you thought, okay, he's definitely going to go for the double champ status. He's going to fight Islam. It doesn't seem like Islam Makhachev's team are too keen on taking that fight just because Islam has already fought a lot of featherweights. And I understand that. But at the same time, that is the biggest fight in the UFC, I believe, at the moment, outside of John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. And I do believe Ilia Topuria would probably win that fight. But having said that, next we've got Volk versus Diego Lopes. The crazy thing is I met Diego Lopes at UFC 309 fight week. That was John Jones versus Stipe Miocic here in New York in November. And I remember going up to him and I asked him, Diego, who's the next fight for you? Is it going to be Volkanovski? I said that there. And then he said, well, I don't know, man. I haven't heard anything from the UFC. And now we're finally here where he is fighting for the undisputed featherweight title of the world against Volkanovski. Maybe it was me. Maybe I should get the credit for putting that matchup together a little bit. I also met Gilbert Burns. I'll put the pictures here from that day. It was one of the coolest days of my life. Watching Diego Lopes crack the pads on practicing leg kicks as well. It sounded like missiles were going off, literally. One of the coolest days of my life, especially, I think I just started this podcast as well. And I was like, I'm going to go meet some UFC fighters. And I met Michael Chandler that week. I met Corey Sandhagen in the park. I met those two. So it was incredible. But that fight obviously is going to be huge. If you had to ask me right now, before I do my episode coming out this Thursday or Friday before the fight to do my official predictions, I would say that I'm going to go with Volkanovski probably. But at the same time, you're kind of betting, you're setting yourself up for failure if you're going to put money on Volkanovski. Just from that statistic, it's like if you're 35 years or older fighting for a championship below 170 pounds, you are like 2-40 or something crazy. I'll put the stat up on screen because I know I've butchered that. But basically, Volkanovski, like statistically, is not supposed to win this fight. But stylistically, I think Volkanovski obviously has all the tools to beat Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes is a savage. Diego Lopes has power. He's improved immensely since he entered the UFC. One of the biggest badasses in the UFC, who can just absolutely put your lights out, always delivers an entertaining fight for the fans and has such a cool story. And we'll get into that more on Thursday and Friday. But right now I'm going to go with Volk just out of an emotional, sentimental bias. I don't want to see Volk lose again, especially not get KO'd after coming off those two brutal KOs to Islam Makhachev with the head kick. And I'll see Ilia Topuria putting him out like to death. So yeah, I mean, obviously I don't want to see that happen again. As a fan of Volk, Volkanovski could retire tomorrow and be one of the greatest we've ever seen in the sport. At one point was the pound for pound number one, went up to fight Islam Makhachev when they had that 5-round war, lost and still kept and still retained his pound for pound number one status, which is one of the coolest things ever at featherweight. The run that he went on, went on a 20-fight win streak, didn't lose for 10 years before, taking that short notice fight against Islam Makhachev and taking that ill-advised fight against Ilia Topuria after that Islam Makhachev loss. So one of the greatest. So excited for that fight, and we'll have my official predictions, breakdown, analysis from their fights coming Thursday and Friday. Please watch out for that. And now I'm going to talk about this co-main event. Okay, so we've got Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett. As I mentioned, I met Michael Chandler before he fought Charles Oliveira at UFC 309 in New York. He was all right. He was decent and nice to speak to. I really appreciate him taking the time to take photos with us. He was at the Hard Rock Cafe. He was promoting some alcohol. I think it's his alcohol. And now he's fighting Paddy Pimblett, for a guy that was supposed to be fighting Conor McGregor, I think it was last summer, supposed to be fighting Conor McGregor, signed that dotted line to now be fighting Paddy Pimblett is a crazy turnaround. And it shows you the unreliability of Conor McGregor, first of all, to not show up to that fight. What happens then is Michael Chandler's out of the cage for 2 years. He goes in against a killer in Charles Oliveira, who's on this revamped, rehyped journey towards the title charge again, loses, gets hurt pretty bad, has a lot of damage out of that fight, turns around, is now fighting Paddy Pimblett to kind of be served up as Paddy Pimblett's way into the top 5, way into the, upper echelons, the Mount Rushmore of the lightweight division that he'll enter if he gets a win against Michael Chandler. For Michael Chandler, this is all about keeping your status in the mix with the big boys in the lightweight division. And for Paddy Pimblett, this is all about taking Michael Chandler's status, taking Michael Chandler's name, putting him in the past, establishing yourself as the present and the future. And I think this is going to be a really interesting fight coming up. And if you had to ask me right now, like I did with Volk and Lopes, I would probably say Paddy Pimblett's going to win this fight. But at the same time, the amount of power that Michael Chandler possesses and the way that Paddy Pimblett unfortunately does keep his chin up in the air, you never know. If one of those connects with you, you could be going to sleep. So, that's a really huge matchup. But I did want to talk about, and this is kind of a narrative that's been going on, is the Michael Chandler spoke about the cheating allegations and kind of people labeling him as a dirty fighter. And he kind of said something to the effect of, I try and be a good person. I try and make sure that I do things with honor and respect. And so for people saying that I'm a dirty fighter, it's kind of hard for me. And I completely understand that. I guess if you're a person that identifies yourself with values of being kind, respectful, not cheating, not doing quote unquote dirty things. But at the same time, if you look at his most recent fight with Charles Oliveira here in New York, there was a sequence where I think he did hurt Charles, but he had him, up against the cage and they were on the ground and he's ground and pounding the back of Charles Oliveira's head, maybe 10 to 20 times unanswered shots. And I made a clip here on the podcast after that event and said, Michael Chandler's a dirty fighter. You can't do that. It was purposely going for the back of the head. He responded, not to me, I'm not going to say to me, he responded in general to saying there is a specific part of the back of the head that's allowed by the Athletic Commission. I was in that 2-inch radius, whatever. I was in that 2-inch distance of the back of the head. It was fine shots, legal shots, and then, but it's not just fans, right? It's other fighters. It's Justin Gaethje saying it. It's Dustin Poirier saying it. So at a certain point with guys he's been in there with are saying it, then it must be true. And I don't think they're just trying to gang up on him for no reason. And I've seen it. You can look at the footage. It's there for all of us to see. He has done quote unquote dirty things inside the octagon. But that is a huge thing. That's a huge narrative going into this fight, right? And it seems to be affecting him emotionally, where we might see an even more measured Chandler, an even more Chandler that's not just guns blazing, because that narrative might be playing a part to him. A lot of the narrative going to the Charles Oliveira fight was, I'm going to calm down. I'm not going to be as rash, as crazy, as chaotic when I'm in there. But at the end of the day, that's what's made him such a good fighter. It's kind of like Michael Chandler is kind of like the Russell Westbrook of the UFC, in the sense that, maybe Russell Westbrook's, pound for pound accomplishments in his own sport, if you could kind of compare them, are a bit higher to Michael Chandler, what he's done in MMA. But their mentality is the same. Just that 100% pedal to the metal, like, this is how I got here, this is how I'm going to do it, this is what's always worked for me. It affects their decision-making in the way that, Russ, late game, is going to play the exact same way as he does early game. He's going to play game 1 of the regular season the same way he's going to play game 82 of the regular season. He's going to play game 54 of the regular season the same way he's going to play, first round of the playoffs. There's no change in his mentality, in his decision-making, which means that if you always decide the same way and always act the same way, despite a change in context, that can cause some issues. That's what's kind of bit Michael Chandler in the ass throughout his career, is that he knows, if I pump this pedal to the metal, I can get a win. I can knock out anybody. I can front kick Tony Ferguson into outer space. But it also gets him in trouble, right? With Charles Oliveira in that first title fight that he had. Or with Justin Gaethje going to war, making poor decisions. Dustin Poirier ending up getting finished. So at the end of the day, Michael Chandler is definitely, in my opinion, one of the most entertaining fighters of all time. Always delivers a good fight. It's not going to be any different with Paddy Pimblett. But there is definitely a sense for him that he needs to become more of a honed, calm, composed fighter. And I think he sat down with, I think it was, who was it? He sat down with a legend in the combat sports game, and he was doing an interview. And he was talking about how the Charles Oliveira fight was the biggest letdown of his career. I have it here. He says, I feel like I was more let down in my entire career than with any other fight in this last fight with Charles Oliveira. But I did see glimpses of more composure in that fight. There was a loss, but there was growth in that fight. If I use my brain, I think I made some very good veteran decisions. I felt more alive, more composed, and more comfortable in there. So I think there is definitely a shift within his camp with his coach and Henry Hoof and all the guys down there at Killcliff. probably telling him like, yo, you still can do this, but you're going to need to make smart decisions, especially as he gets older. I think he's approaching 40 years old now, especially at lightweight, as we spoke about with Volk. The older you are at the lighter weight classes, the more it hurts you because you need that speed, you need that reaction time, and you need that agility because the guys down there, it's just a murderer's row of a division lightweight. So, huge fight. I just want to talk about the cheating allegations. What do you think? Do you think Michael Chandler is a dirty fighter? Do you think that he needs to be more composed in the fight? Or do you think he needs to be the same on Michael Chandler and embrace who he really is to go get this win against Paddy Pimblett next Saturday? Let me know down in the comments. Now, we're going to talk about Sean O'Malley versus Merab being booked yet again. So, for me, this was a bit of a shock. I definitely thought maybe it should have been Peter Yan. Maybe it should have been somebody else. But the UFC do have a great relationship with Sean O'Malley. They obviously want to keep him at the top of the sport. They do feel, as probably Sean O'Malley feels, and maybe his team and his fans feel, that he wasn't 100% in that last fight at UFC Noche. So, on Noche UFC. So, they're going to give him the shot again. He said, I'm going to be 70% better than I was last time. He had a torn labrum in his hip. That makes sense. I think he's justified in feeling that way. So what I really wanted to speak about was Coach Javier Mendez's comments about his fighter, Umar Nurmagomedov, after the fight with Merab. Obviously, Merab, the chain wrestler, it was absolutely insane. He made Umar look like he was about to pass out on the spot. It was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen, and one of the most incredible feats of cardio I just haven't seen it in any of the sport with Merab. He's an absolute alien. And if you look at my reaction, I have it here, and you can go look in the description and listen to it. I was going nuts. I was like, oh my God, the showboating is absolutely insane. He doesn't even care. This is like the most legacy building performance I've ever seen. But Coach Javier Mendez, Umar Nurmagomedov's coach, along with Habib, of course, spoke about the showboating. And I want to play what he said about his fighter after the fight.
I said, you know what, Umar? I felt, in my opinion, I felt you won 3 out of the 5 rounds, and maybe I'm being biased, but I felt in the 5th round, the reason why you didn't win is because he showboated his way to winning that. Like, he acted like the victor where you were tired, and that's why I feel he basically took it from you because you led him, but I felt you won, because when you're looking on damage and this and that, but when it comes to presence, he definitely got that. He definitely got that. So, but the actual damage that he did was nothing compared to what Umar did. He did more, but again, he did show that I'm the winner, and Umar couldn't stop him, from showing that, So, I can see how the judges would get swayed on that,
So that's what Coach Javier Mendez said, and I understand what he's saying. Now, if you look back at that fight, I need to watch it back as well after these comments to see if the actual damage that Umar Nurmagomedov did was more than Merab. But at the time, the showboating definitely contributed to Merab winning that fight. But my thing is, the reason why is because obviously at that point, Merab is starting to build. And it's the 3rd round. And I believe Umar won the first 2 rounds. So it's in that 3rd round, Merab is building into the fight. And he's already showboating when he knows he's down 2 rounds. He's down 2 rounds, already showboating. Obviously carries it on to the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th. He's taking down Umar Nurmagomedov. He's landing good shots. From my opinion, from my memory, if you look at my reaction on the channel, Merab was landing more damaging shots. And he was showboating. Did the showboating help him get more points? Absolutely. Absolutely. But that has nothing to do with the actual damage. I still believe Merab was winning the exchanges. He had time to showboat. But it's also a piece of genius that I'm sure Merab has taken from people like Alexander Usyk in boxing. Like, if you watch Alexander Usyk box, when he fought Daniel Dubois is a great example, whenever he fought Tyson Fury, when he fought Anthony Joshua those 2 times, it's, you obviously fought Tyson Fury twice as well. Every time he gets hit with a clean shot or a semi-clean shot, he complains to the ref. He'll get hit in the stomach, say it was a low shot and it was a low blow to the cup. He'll get hit in the head and he'll say it was the back of the head shot. And he's constantly, you see him, he's dancing around the ring, just talking to the ref basically the whole fight. It's if you do things like that, if you showboat, you show that you're winning the fight or the opposite, you're talking to the ref complaining, you're also influencing the judges to say, okay, well, that shot didn't really connect. That shot wasn't actually a legal low blow to the midsection that really hurt Alexander Usyk. That just landed to the cup. If Merab is getting, punched by Umar and then takes Umar down and then stands up and waves at the crowd, is kissing him on the back of the neck like he did to Sean O'Malley, the judges and everybody else, and Umar and Merab and the ref, everybody, your mum, your grandma, are going to all believe that Merab was winning that fight. If you take away all the showboating, maybe the fight looks a little bit closer. I agree with that by Javier Mendez. Probably the fight looks a million times closer. But at the end of the day, Merab really did enough to win that fight. I think everybody in the room, everybody in the arena, the three judges, obviously, everybody understood that Merab really won that fight. So I really appreciate these comments. I think it's a very important discussion. I'd like to talk about it more like I just did a little bit with Alexander Usyk. I think there is definitely some veteran moves that you can pull. It's, we're going to do a section on the next podcast about veteran moves fighters pull to influence judges on the fights, whether that's taking more rest than they need to, whether that's faking a cup shot, saying they got hit low and they didn't, but they still get their 5 minutes, whether it's John Jones eye pokes for the rest of his life, knowing that the judges really are never going to do anything to take it away from him. There is definitely a discussion to be had for me about Alexander Usyk, saying that he's getting hit to the back of the head when he's not, saying that he's getting hit low when he's not. Eye poked in MMA specifically not being sanctioned and not being, punished. That you kind of just get a slap on the wrist and you're allowed to keep going. Low cup shots, if it happens multiple times, it's very rare that we're actually seeing points get deducted these days. And there's a lot of things to be spoken about. And perhaps back to that Michael Chandler conversation, right? The fish hooking with Dustin Poirier, putting the finger in the mouth to try and get his arm under the choke better. The back of the head shots. The back of the head shots, it drives me crazy when they're not implemented, like as in when they're not being punished. Michael Chandler, again, with Charles Oliveira, they shouldn't be allowed at all. There should be no tolerance. And if I can see it from the TV, the referee who's right there should be able to see it as well. I think it goes back to a bigger discussion again about MMA judging and scoring. The rules need to be enforced, and sometimes they're just not. And that goes across all sports, don't get me wrong. The officiating is never going to be in a perfect place, even with the help of like VAR and technology in football, for example. But I think these were all incredibly important conversations. Let me know what you think. Do you think Merab only won that fight because of the showboating, or, was really favored because of the showboating? Or do you think that it was a fair and square dominant performance like I do, where it was just the showboating made it even better? Because he was showboating when he was down 2 rounds. It wasn't like he wasn't winning and it was a close 5th round and then he just started showboating then to ease the judges into the decision. Nah, it became a dominant performance. So let me know. But hope you guys enjoy me integrating some media into the podcast now. Hopefully there's more graphics, and we're just talking about more narratives this week and kind of building up my coverage of the entire game, not just, hardcore analysis like I have been doing. I want to say thank you so much for the support on the most recent content. Please subscribe if you are new here. There is a giveaway coming. I know I say it every week for the last 4 months. It is on the way. It's getting there. We've got some designs. So just watch out, all right? Keep an eye on this space. Watch this space. But yeah, thank you so much for all the support. Please subscribe. And I will see you on Thursday and Friday to go through UFC 314, the co-main event and the main event, maybe more, possibly. But I'll see you then. Thank you so much.